Ma'am, stop right there. This area is off limits to civilians. Captain Rourke's voice cut through the air sharp as steel blocking Maya Cole's path. She offered him a polite smile, keeping her breath steady, as if she had lived her whole life under such scrutiny. I'm sorry, I just wanted to get a little closer. My son is graduating today. Rourke did not soften. His fingers tightened on the brim of his cover. Let me see your access pass. Now. The way he looked at her was no different than facing an actual security threat. Families nearby slowed their steps. They stared at Maya with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, as if she had deliberately crossed into forbidden ground. Rourke raised his voice again. Show me your ID. Your behavior is highly suspicious. Maya reached into her bag, ready to pull out her wallet. But when Rourke grabbed her arm to escort her for verification, her sleeve slid up. A tattoo surfaced, a Marine Corps K-bar intertwined with a medical caduceus, and beneath it, a date that only those who survived would ever understand. Maya lifted her gaze, her eyes cutting straight through Rourke's arrogance. Captain, you've just made a very serious mistake. A few dozen meters away, Gunnery Sergeant Dalton caught sight of the tattoo. His face drained of color. He pulled out his phone and dialed the sergeant major directly, his voice low and urgent. No one in the crowd knew that in that exact moment, something had been set into motion, something this base hadn't witnessed in many years. If you believe true courage isn't found in the sound of gunfire, but in the silence carried by those who've walked through war, then subscribe to Veterans' Legacy Stories so we can preserve the memory, the dignity, and the honor of the quiet heroes among U.S. The tension from their earlier confrontation still hung in the air, like an overstretched wire, but Maya Cole did not answer any of Captain Rourke's questions. She stood still calm in a way that made the onlookers unsure of what she might be thinking. Rourke leaned slightly forward, his voice sharpening, as though trying to exert authority over a woman who wore no uniform at all. Did you hear me? I'm asking why you came down this path. Maya did not raise her voice, did not argue, did not offer another apology. She glanced briefly toward the open area ahead, then lowered her eyes. Her breathing slowed, each inhale and exhale unnervingly steady. It wasn't the indifference of someone careless. It was the inner discipline of a person who had faced situations hundreds of times more intense than this. A reflex forged in long hours spent under explosions and swirling dust. In that moment, a faint echo from the past surfaced, the crackle of gunfire, the collapse of brick walls, and a desperate cry from someone who had once placed their life entirely in her hands, corpsman up. The sound struck straight into her chest, even though it lasted only a heartbeat. Maya gently tightened her grip around her left wrist, right where the tattoo lay hidden beneath her sleeve. A small, almost invisible gesture, yet one that felt like she was touching something sacred. A vow she had carried with her since Fallujah. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't stirring sympathy. It was simply a moment of grounding, of reconnecting with the brothers in arms who had trusted her without hesitation. Rourke saw the movement, but he didn't understand. To him, Maya's silence was a form of defiance. Ma'am, I'm talking to you. Do not ignore an order. This is a military installation. Maya lifted her head, her voice steady and soft. I heard you. Just that. A quiet response. Yet it made Rourke feel as though all his rank and authority had suddenly slipped from under his feet. He tightened his cover, exhaled harder than necessary, trying to keep his words sharp. But the more he tried, the more he revealed the restlessness of a young officer who had never been placed in a situation beyond what the manuals had prepared him for. Around them, families started to slow their steps. Mothers leading small children, brand new Marines waiting for the graduation ceremony, all turned to look at Maya with a blend of curiosity and confusion. They didn't know who she was, nor why an ordinary-looking woman could stand so still while being chastised to her face. No excuses, no fear, only the stillness of a stone standing firm in a rushing river. Maya did not resist. She didn't react harshly. She didn't try to ease the situation. She simply remained there, holding her silence like an invisible shield. To her, silence was not weakness. It was dignity. It was self-respect. It was the one thing that had remained intact after years in which explosions and screams had stripped so much else away. From a distance came the sound of hurried footsteps. Gunnery Sergeant Dalton was approaching. His face no longer carried the calm of a man who had trained countless recruit classes. Instead, it was drawn with caution, with worry. He looked at Maya's stance, steady, quiet, composed, then at Rourke. And in that instant, Dalton understood that something was terribly off. Rourke, however, noticed nothing. He believed he was following protocol. He thought he was handling a suspicious civilian among hundreds of families there to watch their loved ones graduate. He had no idea he was standing in front of someone who carried memories he was far too young to comprehend. Dalton quickened his pace, eyes locked on Maya. He sensed something Rourke could not, that her silence wasn't disobedience, but the mark left by souls who had survived the battlefield and walked back into the world bearing its shadows. And that understanding made Dalton's heart sink. And as the distance closed, what Dalton saw in Maya's eyes told him clearly the humiliation unfolding that day would not fall upon the quiet woman standing still. It would fall upon the young officer who had no idea what he was about to face. Captain Rourke almost straightened to full height as his tone shifted completely. He was no longer speaking just to Maya. He was announcing to the entire crowd that he was handling a potential threat. Lance Corporal, stand by. She may need to be escorted to PMO. His voice was sharp and loud enough that a few parents carrying small children turned their heads. Families standing nearby stepped back, their eyes shifting into caution. In that moment, Maya, a mother who simply wanted to get closer to see her son graduate, was suddenly viewed as a disruptor. No one knew who she was. No one knew what she had done. They saw only a woman being barked at by a young officer in the middle of the walkway, and the misunderstanding wrapped around the scene like a heavy wet cloth. Maya felt a familiar shame rising slowly within her, not because Rourke held authority, but because of the way the crowd looked at her, the same way she had been looked at during the years after leaving the military, when she tried to return to ordinary life only to be treated as if her combat experience counted for nothing. Suspicion, wary glances, a lack of trust. All of it returned at once like a deep wound that had seemed healed but throbbed painfully with the slightest touch. Rourke kept escalating his voice like a blade driven straight down. You're not following orders, and that makes you a threat. This is a serious warning. Maya didn't react outwardly, but inside her a rush of memories surged like echoes from a distant battlefield, bricks shattering under direct fire, bullets tearing through a wall she was kneeling beside, comrades screaming her name in desperation. Doc, over here, she's not breathing, hurry. The acrid smell of gunpowder came back to her. The heat of dust from blown-out rooms returned. Her hand trembled once as she remembered the pair of young eyes fading between her palms. Those memories never truly left her. They lived in every breath she took. Rourke stepped forward again, his heel striking the ground as if staking a claim. Ma'am, give me your arm. Now! He wasn't threatening her with a weapon, and he wasn't shouting, but the way he issued the command, the way he reached for her wrist, felt like he was cornering her inside an invisible wall. Maya lifted her eyes and looked directly at him. There was no challenge in her gaze, no anger, only a clear, unmistakable disappointment, the kind that made Rourke's expression falter, as if he had suddenly realized something his mind couldn't yet articulate. She spoke softly, slowly, like a breath. Do you truly believe I am the one who poses a danger here? There was no defiance in her tone, but the words widened the silence around them. Every person nearby stopped talking, turning to witness the exchange. Each of Maya's sentences was like a mirror, not striking back, but forcing the one who heard them to confront their own reflection. Rourke clenched his hand, flustered. He still tried to hold on to the script he believed in. I'm following protocol. You need to comply. Maya didn't argue. She only exhaled quiet and controlled. And in that moment, her calm made Rourke look less like an authority figure and more like a young officer losing control of his own judgment. From a distance, Dalton had witnessed everything. His quick pace turned urgent. The gunnery sergeant's face tightened, the look of someone who knew that one more second of delay could send the situation spiraling somewhere no one wanted. Dalton understood one crucial truth. Rourke was not just grabbing the wrist of a woman. He was touching something deeper, something heavier, something that deserved reverence, not suspicion. And as Dalton closed the gap, his instincts sharpened like a blade. The next moment would shift the entire direction of what was happening. The truth was about to break open, and nothing from this point on would remain merely a young officer's misunderstanding. Gunnery Sergeant Dalton had gotten close enough when his eyes landed on something he never expected to see again at Paris Island. The tattoo on Maya's wrist, a clean, sharp K-bar intertwined with a caduceus. The emblem of a military corpsman was now plainly visible beneath the sleeve that had slid down. He froze. His breath hit his chest, as if something had stopped it mid-air. A whisper escaped from deep in his throat. No way. This wasn't a common tattoo. Not decoration. Not something anyone could simply choose to wear. It was a mark carved into the skin of those who had run into gunfire during the fiercest battles to save the lives of United States Marines. A mark reserved only for those who had survived. A cold wash ran down Dalton's spine. Everything unfolding in front of him suddenly looked like a massive mistake slipping out of control. Without hesitation, he reached into his pocket, dialing a number he had only called twice in his entire career. His voice was low, weighted with urgency. "Sir, it's Doc Cole. Captain Rourke is about to cuff her." The other end of the line fell into an eerie silence, a silence heavier than the sound of Rourke's boots grinding against the pavement ahead. For several seconds, the entire world seemed to compress into a single breath. Then came one short, cutting sentence impossible to mistake. "Keep her there. Colonel Reeves is on his way." Those few words were enough to make Dalton straighten his grip, tightening around the phone. He knew the arrival of Colonel Reeves was never a small matter, especially when the name Doc Cole was involved. He rushed toward them, his face tense, as if witnessing a ceremony where even the smallest misstep would be an unforgivable act of disrespect. Meanwhile, the crowd began to part. No one told them to. They simply sensed a strange pressure entering the air, the kind that only appears when real authority is approaching. A black command vehicle rolled slowly into the area. No sirens, no flashing lights. Yet its presence carved out a quiet space around it, one people instinctively stepped away from. Mothers guiding children moved aside. Freshly graduated Marines fell into silence as though witnessing something beyond their understanding. Maya remained standing tall, unmoving. She didn't yet know what was happening, but she could feel a shift in the crowd's gaze. It was no longer curiosity or suspicion. It had become something closer to reverence, even if they didn't yet know why. Rourke still didn't notice any of it. He stood firmly in place, wearing the confident expression of an officer convinced he was following proper procedure. He saw Dalton running toward him and interpreted it only as backup. "Gunnery Sergeant, I'm handling the situation. I need you to step aside." Rourke's commanding tone fell on the exact wrong person at the exact wrong moment. Dalton didn't argue. He simply looked at Maya, at the tattoo, then at the approaching command vehicle, worry pooling in his eyes in a way Rourke couldn't begin to understand. The vehicle came to a stop. Its door opened with a weight that seemed to shift the air itself. Maya tilted her head slightly. Rourke straightened instinctively, as if sensing something he couldn't yet name. The crowd held its breath, every gaze fixed on that door, waiting for whatever judgment was about to emerge. From behind, Dalton inhaled, deeply fully aware that this moment would turn the entire situation on its head. And the instant Colonel Reeves stepped out, the atmosphere thickened, as if the very heart of the base was preparing to speak, announcing a recognition that no explanation beforehand could ever match. The door of the command vehicle swung open, and Colonel Reeves stepped out, with the bearing of a man who had spent years leading the toughest units in the Marine Corps. His expression sharpened the moment his eyes swept across the unfolding scene. He didn't need anyone to brief him. He understood instantly what was happening. He walked straight toward Maya. Each step carried a measure of respect that only a few in the Corps had ever earned. When he stopped in front of her, the air seemed to thicken in a single heartbeat. Reeves's gaze was as sharp as a honed blade. He looked at Captain Rourke's hand gripping Maya's wrist, and in that single instant, without a word, without an order, Rourke released her as if he had touched fire. The confidence drained from his face, replaced by a clear, unmistakable embarrassment. Reeves stood tall, his shoes settling firmly on the ground. He placed his hands along the seams of his trousers, his posture forming the crisp silhouette of a senior Marine officer. Then he raised his hand in a precise, decisive salute. "Doc Cole, welcome aboard Paris Island. It is an honor." His voice rang out clearly, drawing a sudden absolute silence from everyone around them. A few mothers in the crowd lifted their hands to their mouths. A group of newly graduated Marines stiffened their throats, tightening. They didn't fully understand the weight of his words, but they felt their significance. Dalton stood directly behind Reeves. He snapped to attention, lifting his hand in a salute, guided as much by duty as by the memory he had sworn never to forget. The sergeant major who had just stepped out of the vehicle mirrored the gesture with absolute formality. 3 men, each representing a different pillar of the Marine Corps, stood in unified respect before a woman dressed in civilian clothing. Maya did not move. Her eyes no longer held the calm detachment from earlier. They softened with a quiet surprise. She hadn't sought this attention. She hadn't wanted anyone to know what she had endured that day. But what Reeves had just done wasn't meant to impress the crowd. It was an act of genuine recognition, a tribute held back for years, finally given its voice. Reeves turned slightly toward the gathering, his voice deepening with reverence. This woman is a Navy Silver Star recipient, a hero to the Marines of Kilo Company. Each word landed like a drumbeat, wiping away every trace of misunderstanding, doubt, or confusion that lingered earlier. People straightened where they stood. A few veterans in the family rows placed hands over their hearts. Young Marines looked at Maya differently, no longer as a woman who wandered into the wrong path, but as a living symbol of the courage they had only learned about in their history briefings. Far in the distance, standing in formation for the upcoming ceremony, Evan Cole, Maya's son, caught sight of the scene. He saw his mother standing among senior officers. He saw Colonel Reeves saluting her. He saw the entire base fall into reverent stillness because of her. His eyes widened, his breath hitched, and his heart pounded so hard he gripped his rifle sling for steadiness. He had always known his mother had served in the Navy, but what he was witnessing now was something he had never imagined. The silence held, but it had changed. It was no longer heavy with tension. It had become a mantle of respect gently draped over the crowd. Rourke stood nearby, his face flushed with shame. Every word he had said, every assumption, every careless action, all of it came back to strike at the fragile pride of a young officer still new to the weight of his uniform. Reeves lowered his hand, his eyes still stern yet carrying something deeper, something like profound respect for Maya. And in that moment, amid the soft whisper of the wind and the hush of those around her, Maya realized that life had strange circles. Some memories she thought had been buried were now being called forth, not in darkness, but in honor. And as Colonel Reeves turned back toward the crowd to prepare to share more of the untold story of that battle, the entire scene seemed to lean toward Maya, ready to hear the parts of her life she had never fully spoken aloud to anyone. Silence covered the entire area as Colonel Reeves stood tall before Maya. No one moved. No one shifted. It was as if everyone was waiting for something they did not yet know how to name. Reeves opened the thin file his aide had handed him, but he didn't need to look at it for long. What he was about to say had already been etched into the memories of many who had served alongside warriors of Maya Cole's generation. His voice rose slow, deliberate, every word striking the air with weight. November 14th, 2004, Fallujah. A few older veterans in the crowd inhaled sharply. They remembered that day. They understood what it meant. Reeves continued. She ran into a collapsing building immediately after it took direct fire. Several parents standing nearby stared at Maya in disbelief. A woman in civilian clothes, calm and composed, yet she had once sprinted into a crumbling structure to save lives. Reeves kept reading, his voice dropping into a tone layered with deep respect. She took direct enemy fire to save 6 Marines trapped in the rubble. A newly graduated Marine instinctively placed a hand over his chest, as if saluting the legend he had just realized was standing in front of him. Reeves looked straight at Maya, making it clear that what he spoke now was not a retelling, but testimony. When one Marine's femoral artery was severed, she used her own body to shield him and applied pressure to the wound. For over an hour. Small whispers rose in the crowd, not out of doubt, but out of astonishment. Few understood the pain strain and extraordinary endurance required to hold such a wound amid a firefight. Reeves spoke again, his voice lowered with quiet reverence. She refused to leave her position, even when ordered to withdraw. She only moved once all 6 wounded Marines had been safely evacuated. The space around them fell utterly still. Not a single sound intruded. Those closest instinctively placed their hands over their hearts. Evan, standing in the formation of new Marines, looked at his mother with eyes almost glowing. All his life she had spoken no more than a handful of sentences about her service. He had always thought she was just a regular corpsman who did basic medical work. But now, listening to every specific deed, every second of life or death struggle she had endured, his chest tightened with pride so fierce it nearly broke him. Reeves lowered the file. He didn't need it anymore. He stepped forward, his voice thick, strong, heavy with truth. She carries the mark of those Marines, and she paid for it in blood. People in the crowd bowed their heads subtly, as if his words had fallen straight into their hearts. Some wiped their eyes. Some stood a little straighter. No one looked at Maya as a woman who wandered into the wrong place anymore. They saw her as a living witness to a kind of courage they had only read about in history. Rourke stood off to the side, his face pale. Every word he had shouted, every assumption he had thrown on Maya, all of it replayed in his mind, like cruel scratches. He lowered his head, unable even to look at the tattoo on her wrist. The arrogance he carried earlier had been broken by the very truth he refused to see. And in that moment, as every gaze shifted toward Maya with newly awakened reverence, another kind of silence emerged, not the silence of shock, but the silence that comes before a lesson is revealed, from the very woman who had walked through fire to save lives she had never even known. After hearing Colonel Reeves recount Maya's entire record of valor, Captain Rourke stood frozen for a long moment. The youthful confidence he had worn earlier now felt like an empty shell stripped completely away. Standing before him was no longer a troublesome woman, no longer a difficult civilian, but someone who had bled to keep alive the very people wearing the same uniform he wore. He drew in a deep breath, as if preparing to face his own mistake. Then he stepped forward slowly, all traces of authority gone. His eyes dropped, unable to look at the tattoo again, the guilt constricting his throat so tightly he could barely speak. His voice came out low, sincere, and trembling at the edges. "Ma'am, I was arrogant. I was wrong. And I am truly sorry." People nearby turned their heads. They hadn't expected to hear such a confession, but when the words fell, the crowd softened. Not every young officer had the courage to admit fault, much less in front of superiors, fellow Marines, and an entire base. Maya looked at Rourke. There was no anger in her eyes, no resentment, no reproach. Only a quiet steadiness like a stream carving through stone, soft enough not to shatter anything, but strong enough to smooth away the sharpness of temper. She answered, her voice gentle but firm enough to be remembered for a lifetime. "Before you check someone's ID, look them in the eyes first. You'll learn far more that way." Rourke bowed his head deeper. Not because of rank, but because of respect. He knew Maya had just given him a lesson no military textbook had ever taught, a lesson in seeing people in humility, and in understanding that true strength sometimes lies in the quiet presence standing before you. Maya held his gaze for a few seconds, her expression softening, as if she could see in him the same young Marines she once saved in Fallujah. Men who had made mistakes, lacked experience, but grew into better warriors because of the trials they endured. In her mind, an old image flickered back, a night thick with dust and fire, a shattered room, a young Marine trembling violently from blood loss. She knelt beside him, her hands drenched in blood yet steady with a chilling calm. She remembered the ragged breaths of his squadmates, the way they screamed her name in desperation. She remembered taking the Marine's hand, holding on to his fading life with her own body. The memory passed in an instant, but it was enough to make Maya's eyes blur with the weight she had carried for years. She never told Rourke any of this. She didn't need to. It was the silence itself that made her lesson sink deeper. A soft breeze swept across the parade grounds, carrying the murmurs of families waiting for the ceremony to begin. The atmosphere had changed, as if everyone present sensed they had just witnessed a turning point. Quiet, not dramatic, but profound enough to make many rethink the things they often took for granted. Dalton stood behind them, his hands clasped behind his back, watching with quiet approval. He knew Rourke had just experienced the shock necessary to grow into a better officer. And he knew Maya had given him something precious, something not everyone had the generosity to offer. Evan, watching from afar in the formation, never took his eyes off his mother. He saw her walk through humiliation without a single angry word, armed only with dignity. And in that moment he understood why so many once called her the one who held life together in the middle of hell. The breeze continued, gentle but certain, like an invisible transition between past and present. And carried in that breeze was the beginning of change, spreading quietly across the base, laying the foundation for things that would be put in place later. A silent, enduring legacy, like the footsteps Maya had left throughout her lifetime of service. After that breathless moment, Paris Island was no longer the same. A week later, in meeting rooms for junior officers, people began speaking about a new training program. No announcements. No promotion. Yet it appeared naturally, as if it had always been meant to exist. Its content was simple but profound. How to treat veterans and military families, how to see the person beyond the uniform, how to understand the stories they carried home from war into everyday life. Young officers were expected to learn from lived experience, not from textbooks alone. The unofficial name spread quietly from one person to another. The Cole Protocol, a name that did not belong to any regulation, but belonged to respect. Those who heard it knew immediately that this was not a curriculum written in a conference room, but a lesson carved from an entire lifetime of silent service. Rourke heard about it first. When he met Maya again outside the reviewing area, he walked toward her slowly, no longer with the awkwardness of his earlier apology, but with the determination of someone actively remolding himself. He spoke softly, but with certainty. "I won't forget what you taught me." Maya looked at him, her eyes gentle, yet carrying the firmness of someone who had endured far more than most could imagine. She answered, "Then lead your Marines well. Not advice, not instruction, just a message light but deep like the final door Maya opened, so Rourke could step into his own path of maturity." When the ceremony ended, Evan ran up to his mother. He didn't say a word, he simply held her hand tightly. The two walked side by side down the path leading toward the base's front gate. The afternoon sun fell over them, touching the K-bar tattoo on Maya's wrist, making its sharp black lines seem alive again. Not to remind her of painful memories, but to remind her that some vows never fade. People on the road paused for a moment as she passed. No cheering, no shouting. Only soft whispers of reverence. That's Doc Cole. She's the one from that story. She's truly a legend. Maya didn't turn back. She didn't want those praises to become another weight on her shoulders. She only wanted to walk beside her son to enjoy a peaceful day she once believed she would never experience again. As the two left the base gates, a breeze from the ocean blew gently across them, carrying the scent of salt and water. The feeling tugged at her memories of those who had fallen, those who had fought beside her, and those whose last breaths she had held in her hands. They were no longer here, but the legacy they left continued flowing quietly through the veins of the young Marines standing on the parade deck that day. And she understood life is not always written in loud victories. Some acts of valor echo only in silence. Some heroes are spoken of only in passing stories. But as long as someone remembers them, they will never be forgotten. A voice rang in her mind, not from anyone before her, but from the memories of those old comrades we remember. Always. And as the sun dipped low, casting a soft amber glow across Maya's shoulders, the closing line felt like a final salute to all who had sacrificed in silence. Veterans' legacy stories. We remember the quiet heroes. If this story makes you believe that honor and kindness never retire, please, share this video and subscribe to Veterans' Legacy Stories so that none of their memories are ever forgotten.